I'm truly in two minds, because in some ways this is exactly what I wanted, and yet it leaves me just feeling empty. Greetings, lovely people, and welcome to Fast Track Thoughts. This time we're going to be talking about the entirety of Tales of the Empire. Technically season 1, though. I don't see this having more than one season. I could be wrong there. But yeah, this one follows specifically the stories of Morgal Elsbeth and Barriss Offee across a total of 6 episodes. It's 3 episodes per character. And yeah, this one, compared to Tales of the Jedi, which is the previous Tales of Star Wars, I guess, show that we've had, I was far more excited for this one than the previous that related to Dooku and Ahsoka. And that was more down to the fact that those were 2 characters that we have a ton of information about. They are very prominent characters across the Clone Wars and the prequels in general, and when it comes to Ahsoka, then going on into the Age of Empire and Age of Rebellion and Age of Resistance and all the various other ages that we cover in the world of Star Wars. So, when it came to the announcement of Tales of the Empire and the fact that it was going to be following one character who I don't really care too much for, but I was interested in seeing what they could do with that character, being Morgal Elsbeth. And then one of my personal favourite characters within the Clone Wars franchise, I suppose, that being Barriss Offee, I was pretty interested. I was pretty excited. It's difficult to put into words what I truly feel. I've just finished watching the series about an hour ago. I've put my thoughts together. And spoilers ahead for this series in its entirety, as I say, all 6 episodes. I will at least be going over the synopsis, essentially, of each episode, just kind of discussing points that I think are important, and pointing out some of my issues. Now, I'm going to be very clear before we get into the actual content here. I have far less to say about the first 3 episodes, those all relating to Morgal Elsbeth, compared to the last 3 episodes all relating to Barriss Offee. And that is purely down to my relative disinterest in Morgan compared to Barriss. That is just how it is, unfortunately. I do not care too much for Morgan, and that will kind of be obvious within this video. So, with all that preamble out of the way, let's get into Episode 1 of Tales of the Empire, The Path of Fear. So, first off, I just want to say it is great to actually see the modern Season 7, the Clone Wars Grievous design actually, used. It was a really weird thing that within Season 7 of the Clone Wars, we never saw Grievous directly, only in brief shots that were basically meant to replicate shots that we saw in Episode 3, and that was kind of it. It was a completely new model based far more on the live-action movie version compared to what we previously had for the rest of the Clone Wars, and it's nice to see him in action. It's nice to actually see that model get use. I don't think he was used that well, in all fairness. He doesn't even use all 4 of his arms. He uses at most 3, and most of the time he's using 2. It feels a little bit wasted. He is very much Grievous in his way. He goes around murdering everyone in his path, and does the most cheap shot imaginable in order to finish a fight. And yeah, it's very Grievous. There's a lot of laughing from him, a lot of coughing, and just generally just Grievous antics. I can't really complain about it. It is good to see new angles on the Night Sister culling, so to speak, the actual end of the Night Sisters. We obviously saw this in the Clone Wars, I believe it was Season 5 or Season 6, as a result of Ventress actually betraying Dooku, which was a very interesting plot point that obviously led to the return of Maul and various other aspects of the Clone Wars that I'm not going to get into in this video. But yeah, it was interesting seeing a different angle of that, because obviously in the original The Clone Wars episode, it was very much focused on bringing dead Night Sisters back to life and kind of our main characters like Mother Talzin. This time around, it is very clearly focused on Morgal Elsbeth and her mother, along with a few unnamed Night Sisters who do get a little bit of screen time and a few words in here or there. It's interesting that we then, once it's all over, because of course, Morgan has to survive for her to continue, so she manages to defeat a commando droid and then just kind of passes out and is apparently just left by all the other droids, which is very nice of them, it's got to be said. And she is taken in by essentially a tribe of mountains people, so a different group that live upon Dathomir, which it feels weird that they keep expanding the lore of Dathomir. We already know now that the Night Sisters are technically not even from the current Star Wars galaxy. We found that out in Ahsoka. And it just gets weirder that not only are there Night Brothers, aka the species that, Maul belongs to, but there's also this other humanoid species that is far more human than, the rest of the Dathomir. And it's interesting because they are clearly not supposed to be Night Sisters. They're not supposed to be the same as the regular Night Sisters. But they also possess magic, and they have the same, laser bows and stuff like that. It seems really weird to not just make it some surviving Night Sisters. And I know they want to kind of, just like they've done with Jedi, they kind of want to make it so there are survivors of that culling, of that, genocide, essentially. There are actually survivors of it. And they are sparse, and they are far and few between, and we don't run into them very often. That's kind of the point. Obviously, we have a Night Sister that appears very prominently in the Jedi Fallen Order series, and that was big. And then, obviously, with Ahsoka and The Mandalorian, we then got Morgan, who is yet another Night Sister that somehow survived. It gets a bit muddy when you are just repeatedly doing the same cliche, and obviously this has been played to death with Jedi, where there are constantly just more and more and more Jedi just appearing and surviving at Order 66. So, I don't know what to feel really about it. It's interesting, but yeah, the Tribe of the Mountains people, or whatever they actually refer to them as, I'm sorry that I'm not, getting their name perfect, I'm pretty sure, but I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. They take her in, they give her a little bit of a home, and then the droids attack, and I think this episode really represents more than anything the true deadliness of battle droids within the Clone Wars. It's something that is often played for laughs. Battle droids, especially B1s, are very much seen as fodder for the clones, and it's really interesting to then see from the perspective of, non-combatants, essentially, how terrifying droids can be, and especially when it comes to super battle droids and commando battle droids. I don't know if the commandos are actually referred to as battle droids, or the commando droids. Anyway, it has to be said that they can be absolutely deadly in a situation where they're not up against a lightsaber or a million blaster fires. When it's just, the Night Sisters using a little bit of magic, but mostly just using blades and laser bows, and then the same thing for these mountains people, it really puts into perspective how strong the Separatist army is, with only, a dozen B1s and maybe a dozen B2s and 4 commando droids. They're able to just massacre any amount of these somewhat powerful non-combatants. They are magic users, each and every one of them pretty much, and at the very least they are all well versed with melee weapons, and yet they just don't stand a chance. It's really a strong case for how strong the Separatist movement actually was within the Clone Wars, and the fact that they really had to nerf them in order for the Republic to win. And obviously that was all part of Palpatine's plan, that's all part of that wider story, but we've never seen the deadliness of battle droids in such a way. I don't think, even in the original Night Sister culling within the Clone Wars, I don't think we saw it quite to this extent. It's quite terrifying in a way, and that's interesting to say about B1s, especially because they are the most cartoonish robots in Star Wars. That's saying something. We have C-3PO, but they are very, very scary in this, and I don't know, it might just be me that thinks that, but they really turned up that factor pretty heavily. And moving on to Episode 2, The Path of Anger. This one is set far further into Imperial reign, though it is still around the time of the transition from Venator to Imperial Star Destroyer. We actually open with a number of plain grey Venators, like we see a lot during the Bad Batch, followed by an ISD, which we did see in the very end, the final episode of the Bad Batch, which I might be making a video in the future about the Bad Batch as a whole. It's hard to go over every thought that I have, whereas this is much shorter, but yeah, that's a video for the future. Regardless, we actually find out that Morgan Elsbeth is actually the designer and somewhat the creator of the TIE Defender, obviously famous from, well, Legends primarily, but also featured pretty heavily in the Rebels TV series. And that is why Thrawn actually has them. Thrawn got the design, got the plans from Morgan when he hired her, essentially. There's no origin for her Beskar spear, but this is where we see the origins of the Thrawn and Morgan relationship. She just kind of already has the Beskar spear, which I think is a little bit weird. Personally, I'm not too sure why they would do it like this, but yeah, either way, she already has it, and, that's never going to get explained again, because they only have 3 episodes that are 12 minutes each. I think they're actually 10 minutes technically, and just 2 minutes of credits, but either way, it's a very interesting episode in the grand scheme of things. It very much shows then Admiral Thrawn to have a ridiculous amount of power. He actually just gifts Morgan 3 Star Destroyers, just straight up, at the end of the episode. It's fascinating to watch, because it's very obvious that Thrawn has essentially unlimited power within the Empire, even as a regular Admiral. This is before the time of Grand Admiral, and it really shows how much Palpatine liked him. And I just think, even though this wasn't about Thrawn, this was about Morgan, I find it very interesting. And it has to be said that that is a really fascinating aspect of the Empire at this point that hasn't really been discussed. We probably will see more of it in the future, especially now that they have a Clone Wars style Thrawn model. But yeah, it's an interesting time for the Empire, this transition from, finally getting rid of the last remnants of the Republic's military and replacing it with the actual Imperial military, that final transition right at the end, right as clones completely vanish and right as Venators are dismantled and all that kind of thing. This is when everything kind of begins for the Star Wars universe that we know from the original trilogy. It's when the rebellion really starts to become a thing, and it's an interesting time period. But moving on to actual events in this episode, it really doesn't go anywhere. And I mean that in the sense of, we are immediately, from the start of the episode, on the planets that we actually find her in Ahsoka, in Mandalorian. She's just where she should be, and there's no travel, there's no journey to get there. It feels kind of almost rushed. And a lot of this series just kind of feels like it should be longer. I feel like 6 episodes is not enough. There should be 8, there should be 10. We need, 5 episodes per character here, because there is a lot of potential here that is just not explored. And if they do a season 2, that will be helped. There'll be more to go over, I'm sure, but it just feels like a lot of lost potential by just not including that content now. And I don't know, I may be just asking a bit too much. This is obviously very much a side series, just as Tales of the Jedi was, and it isn't expected that everyone's going to watch this. This isn't, the big next thing, that would be The Acolyte, I believe. It seems weird to me that they've, hyped it up so much as well. I've seen so many ads and so many, teasers and stuff like that for this series, and it just kind of falls flat on its face, which is really, really unfortunate. And so the finale for Morgan Elsbeth, Episode 3, The Path of Hate. And this one is set in the New Republic era, so this is after the fall of the Empire, after the Battle of Endor, and we have a New Republic diplomat, essentially trying to get Morgan's planet to join the New Republic, which in theory would be pretty easy, except for she's a die-hard Imperial who is still set on making Thrawn the leader of the universe. So, yeah, it doesn't really work in the way that I think they wanted it to. It basically just paints Morgan as this ultimate villain, which we already kind of knew she was. She is trying to bring the end of the universe as we know it by bringing Thrawn back into the fray. And I think in general, it has to be said that we didn't need this for Morgan. This straight up is just a prelude to the events of The Mandalorian, which realistically were just a prelude to the events of Ahsoka. It doesn't really work as its own story, and I think it's just another example of that lost potential. I don't have much to say about this episode because it's very much just New Republic incompetence early on, as we constantly see, with a dash of a character we already know is truly evil, being truly evil, and there's not much else I can say about it. It's just the whole Morgan Elsbeth, and it might just be my own, opinion clouding it all, because I'm not a huge fan of that character, but I just didn't care about any of these events, because to me, they don't really add up to much. It was very nice to see some of the visuals, seeing things like Grievous and Thrawn. That was great. But I don't feel anything from these events. I don't gain any knowledge, really, that I didn't kind of already know, based on the fact that we already have met this character multiple times, years after the events of this story. We know she isn't going to die, or get defeated, or get dethroned, or anything like that, because we know what she does in the future. I don't know, there's a lot of potential here for stories to tell with Morgan Elsbeth, and I just don't think they really told any of them, which is just kind of disappointing. And with that, it brings us to the Barriss Offee half of the season, starting with episode 4, Devoted. So we actually start with the events of Order 66, happening from the perspective of Barriss. And obviously Barriss is not involved, she's not near the Jedi Temple, she's in military prison, and when she tries to ask the clone guards, the Coruscant guards, what's happening, they basically just say, "Be glad you're not a Jedi anymore." Which, to me, seems really odd, because whilst, technically there was specific orders to kill Ahsoka, as well as Maul, Ahsoka and Maul were not Jedi. And yet Order 66 works the same on them. It's a really weird turn of events where a character like Barriss, who is just as much of a Jedi as Ahsoka at this point in the timeline, is not a Jedi yet Ahsoka is. And I say, same goes for Maul. Maul is someone who was never a Jedi, and sure, does act as a Force user with a lightsaber against, Palpatine, but, it just bugged me a little bit how they just so nonchalantly just kind of said, "Oh yeah, Barriss doesn't count as a Jedi." It feels weird, and I don't know whether it's on purpose that they went with such a weird excuse for why the clones aren't trying to kill her. But either way, it's not greatly done. Though I do appreciate that Barriss is, awoken by the screams of the Jedi being killed in the temple. I think that's a very good. I don't know whether to call it good. It's a very interesting way of representing that she's still tuned in to the Force. She still, does care for the people around her, and she can sense these changes, these, massive events in the Force. I don't know, I say, the thing that really bugs me is just the fact that, the clones so nonchalantly just state that she's not a Jedi. It's just, I feel like there's contradictions within the entire Order 66, mythos, but that's beside the point. I'm going off on tangents here. We are then introduced to a character called Lynn, who, as far as I remember, is brand new. I'm not familiar with her design, anything like that, and it does seem that she is a character that is supposed to have already had an existing relationship with Barriss, but she is an ex-Jedi, already turned Inquisitor by the time of, maybe a few weeks after the events of Order 66, which is very interesting enough itself. But yeah, she essentially frees Barriss, takes her to what appears to be some sort of temple in and of itself, which is full of shadow troopers. And shadow troopers are something that I don't believe are officially within canon right now, at least not in the sense that I'm talking about, but black armor clones, and I'm assuming that these are precursors to the Purge troopers, purely on the basis that they are responding, they are working for the Inquisition, the Inquisitors, and I'm fine with that. We don't really see much of them, we just see them around the place while the various Inquisitor stuff is going on, which is fine. I'm, all good with introducing clone types that aren't really featured heavily, but yeah, it's just interesting that plain black armor, or plain dark grey armor, or whatever you want to call them, clone troopers are shown, but nothing is discussed about them. We don't see them, doing any sort of training exercises with the Inquisitors or anything like that. They just kind of exist as clones in this base, but I digress on that one. we have a new design for the Grand Inquisitor, and this is to be expected. It's the Clone Wars style. Thrawn also looks different compared to his other appearances. And I think they've done they've done an alright job. Because what they've basically done is they've merged the Rebels version and the Kenobi version. So they've merged what most people think is the ideal version, that being the Rebels version, with what people think is the absolute opposite of what anyone wants, which is the Kenobi version. And I think it looks okay. It still doesn't look like his species that appears in Episode 3. It just doesn't. The Pawan, or whatever they're called, don't look like the Grand Inquisitor in any depiction. Because in Kenobi, his head's too small. In Rebels, his head is too thin. And I don't even know how to describe this Tales of the Empire version of the Grand Inquisitor. His features are almost correct, because they're the in-between of the two far extremes of design for a Pawan, but I don't know, there's something about it that it still doesn't work for me. And I'm a fan of the Rebels design, don't get me wrong. It's the design that I think of when I think of the Grand Inquisitor, even though it isn't perfect to what a Pawan looks like. It works in the Rebels style, and I don't mind that. I can't help but look at this Clone Wars animation style, or, Tales of the Blank style Grand Inquisitor, and think, he just doesn't look right. And I can't put my finger on why, because his proportions are generally right. He just still looks wrong to me, though, and it just, I don't know, for me, it just kind of bugs me that they still can't get this character right, when they kind of got him right the first time. They just needed to widen his head slightly, and it would have been fine. Just, literally, just take the 3D scan of the model for the Pawan head from Episode 3, and just convert it into the Clone Wars style. It wouldn't be that difficult of a process. It bugs me. And sure, I'm not a 3D designer. Like, I don't claim to be. I would never claim something like that, because I'm just useless with 3D design. When I've tried it, I'm terrible. But it seems like it would be so much easier than whatever they're doing right now. It bugs me. It's a really weird nitpick, but yeah, it really does bug me. But this does end up introducing us to a few of the Inquisitors that we have met before, mostly being the one that we see in Tales of the Jedi with the Crow Mask that fights Ahsoka. And, yeah, that's really the only one I've known. I'm joking, of course. We also see the random Inquisitor that dies by bursting into green flame in Ahsoka. And we find out nothing about him. We don't know who he is. We don't know who he is under the mask. We don't know his name. We don't know what his species is. We don't know anything. We still have no idea what his character is. And it goes for the one wearing the bird mask as well, but at least that one we actually know the full story of, in terms of they are one of the first Inquisitors to come across Ahsoka, and also the first to die. I don't know, there's something about showing these characters that they keep just not telling us anything about, just to not tell us anything about. That just, I don't know, it annoys me. But yeah, Episode 4, generally a very good setup, and by the end we do get Vader, which is cool, but like that's the only appearance of Vader within this series, and it just, once again, wasted potential. We have a character in Barriss who has fought Anakin Skywalker when Anakin was good and she was evil, to simplify it like that. When Anakin was a Jedi still, and Barriss was essentially a dark side user. And yet we have no confrontation between Barriss and Vader. When Vader, Anakin, is now on the dark side, and Barriss is still struggling with her place in all this, whether she is truly good or bad, whether she's truly of the light or of the dark. And just, it's a very weird situation where Vader just kind of looks at Barriss, and Barriss looks at Vader, and then Barriss just kind of goes, "Long live the Empire," and that's it. That's the interaction between them. It's such an odd choice to have these two characters that have history together just kind of ignore it. And I don't know whether it's because, Barriss won't remember or not recognize Anakin, but Vader will recognize the one who caused him to lose his Padawan. It just, I don't know, to me it doesn't add up very well, and it makes a lot more questions that I just really, really want answers to that I'm just never going to. Even in the season 2, I doubt it's going to happen. I doubt there's going to be a confrontation. And anyway, moving on. We have episode 5, Realization. And this episode is interesting enough itself. So we basically are witness to how the Inquisition, the Inquisitorius, whatever you want to call it, creates monsters out of often not so monstrous people. And this is shown through the lens of Lynn, essentially. Lynn is a once decent Jedi, we can assume, based on Barriss's opinion on her. And we witness her as she massacres innocents just because they won't tell her the information she wants. And it is in a brutal fashion. She traps them in essentially a cage and just kills them all. The only one she leaves is the one child that actually gave her the information she wanted. And it really shows how brutal the Empire is, but specifically the Inquisition, when they're trying to find a Jedi. Because this is after Lynn has gone around and questioned the elders and been like, where's the Jedi? We know there's a Jedi here, all that kind of thing, and got nothing. Whilst Barriss has gone over to a scared-looking child and basically just used kindness, used, sympathy, just kind of said, nothing's going to happen to anybody here if you just tell me where the Jedi is. The Jedi is a criminal, we're trying to get rid of the criminals, tell me where they are and you'll be fine. And that kid does end up being fine. But everyone around him is killed. And all the while Barriss is kind of having to hide it from him. Not literally, but she makes him look away. She makes him stay behind her. And she locks him out of this room full of dead friends and family of this child. And it really just shows how dark the Empire truly is. And I don't know how I feel about the extent to which I take it. It feels bad. It doesn't make you feel right to watch. And we've seen child murder and stuff. We've seen, it's in episode 3. We see this kind of stuff. And I don't think it hits as hard as when we have a character stood there in the moment, terrified of it. We cut away in episode 3 before the younglings are slaughtered. We don't really even see much of the younglings slaughter in, say, Kenobi. Even though that it does happen, we don't really see it to the same extent. There's so much there that is just not shown because it's dark, because no one wants to see that sort of it. It hits harder when you have some sort of view of it, even if it is just through the reflection in the eyes of a child. It is horrific in a lot of ways, and it really does show, as I say, just the horror of the Empire and the Inquisition. And yeah, that basically burns into how the entire premise of the Empire is that they create order through fear. And whether it's whether it's Vader's fist, whether it's Vader himself, whether it's the Inquisitors, whether it's things like the ISD or the Death Star, all these things are purely to put fear into the populace so that they will not rebel, so that they will stay loyal to the Empire because they fear what will happen if they don't. And I don't know, there's a lot of stuff like that in these 3 episodes, the 3 relating to Barriss, and I feel like I want to see more of that. Like, specifically, I want to see more of how horrific the Empire actually was to just general civilians. I said it about the first episode, the first Morgan Elsbeth episode, the fact that it shows how deadly battle droids are, it's massive, because it's something that we never see. We just see them as cannon fodder. And this kind of goes the same way. The Empire, while evil and, the bad guy and always the opposition, we never see the true might of it. We never see what it can do to an average population. It just, it doesn't happen. Even, in Kenobi, when it does kind of lean that way, it's Vader killing maybe half a dozen people trying to get to Kenobi. It's, Inquisitors killing 1 or 2 people to get some information. It's just, the brutality that we see from Lynn is, I'd call it excessive, but it's kind of exactly what we should expect from the Inquisitors. And yeah, it's definitely interesting. We essentially then go on to a pretty standard Inquisitor fight between a Jedi and an Inquisitor, namely Lynn versus this reasonably unnamed Jedi. I'm sure they're credited as a character name, but it's not mentioned in the actual episode what their name is. And Barriss essentially tries to convert this Jedi to the Inquisition, which is something we have known to happen, like it does happen every once in a while, and Barriss just wants them to come quietly, put down the weapon, and just, surrender. To which the Jedi actually does surrender, only for Lynn to slice him in the back. And it's just another case of Lynn just being this sadistic monster that the Empire's created. And I don't know, there's so many levels to it where it's like, I don't know why they have to go this hard on it. And I know I've just gone over how I want to see the brutality, but just every decision that Lynn makes is like this, to the point where it almost becomes excessive to the point of comedy, of just, this is a cartoonishly villainous character, and just, I don't know, it kind of turns all the way around into just like, what am I even watching? This is like, just nonsense. And it gets worse when this Jedi, who has had their back sliced up, survives, seemingly. Or at least, we're supposed to believe that he survives, purely on the basis that Barriss throws Lynn off a mountain. We'll come back to that. But yeah, Barriss gets rid of Lynn and promises this Jedi that he'll survive, because he's not dead yet. He's, still breathing, he's still moving. And Barriss promises to save him, which we have to just assume that she does, because we don't see any more of that Jedi after this. This is the last moment, at the end of this episode, that's the last time we see this Jedi. So, presumably, he survives, but we don't actually know. So maybe Barriss was just talking out of nothing. Maybe she was just making it up. Maybe she was trying to comfort a dying Jedi. But either way, Barriss cannot give up the Jedi moral code, despite everything she's done, despite the fact that she completely just hates the Jedi Order for what she thinks it's done to the galaxy. She can't give up that nicety inside. She can't stop being a good person at her core. And I know what most of you are thinking. She's not. She tried to kill people. She did kill people. She bombed the Jedi Temple. She's a political extremist, don't get me wrong. But she's not a political extremist on the same level as Dooku, who is actually just a mass murderer. Like, she is a political extremist who went too far, basically. And just, that's what I always find so interesting with Barriss. And it's just not explored in this series either, so I'm not going to get into it too far, but yeah, it's so interesting that Barriss cannot turn away from this moral code that the Jedi have given her, and it just, I don't know, for me, it makes it interesting. I don't know, but yeah, this episode goes places in ways that I don't really think was completely necessary, but also I appreciate it to some extent. It just, I know I've blabbed a lot about the content in this episode, but it is just so dark and so brutal, yet, I don't know. And as I say, once again, this is a case of somebody who is getting hit with a lightsaber and just surviving. Presumably, I say I can't know for sure, but I have to assume that this Jedi does actually survive. And, I mean, add that to the bucket list of all the characters that have survived being stabbed with a lightsaber. But I digress. I'll move on to the next episode. So that brings us to our final episode of the season, episode 6, The Way Out. And that is a very interesting title, because I thought that this would be the episode, based on the title, where she left the Inquisition. But no, we start with her already having left. Barriss is now a healer in her exile. She's, exiled herself to this ice moon, or this ice planet, or this frozen tundra of a place, where she's now a healer. She has a small team working with her, helping, bring people to her to help, and part of that includes helping Force sensitives actually escape. So, potentially part of the path that was introduced in Kenobi, but it's not explicitly said. There are mentions of a path, or even the path, but it's not necessarily the path of Kenobi, which is an interesting thing where they don't seem to be lining things up too well here, but yeah, Barriss as a healer is helping Force Sensitives, and that is of course going to bring the Inquisition to her. And it does. And it's Lynn. You know, the character who was just thrown off a cliff in the previous episode, and didn't have her lightsaber that can turn into a helicopter blade. And fair enough, maybe she was able to use the Force to bring it towards her and then, helicopter away like we see in Rebels. I just don't think that is a rational excuse for the fact that this character dies in one episode and then is immediately, and I mean immediately, brought back. Like, I know these episodes are short, but it feels like you literally see this character seemingly die, and then immediately just see her walk back towards our main character. It feels disingenuous to the audience that they think that we can actually, just accept that. I don't know. It feels weird to have a character like Lynn just kind of be killed, but then just immediately come back. At least they made us wait for the Grand Inquisitor to return in Kenobi, even though we knew he was going to return because he was in Rebels. But I don't know, there's something about that just bugs me. And yeah, we have a weird confrontation between Lynn and Barriss. Lynn starts trying to fight her. Barriss at this point doesn't have a lightsaber seemingly, and is just dodging lightsaber blades, as you do when you have reached enlightenment or whatever in Exile. It's such a stupid trope that happens with Jedi, but I'm not going to get into that one right now. So Lynn basically just kind of gives up on Barriss and basically says, I'm going to get this Force-sensitive child, and then I'm going to come back for you. Whereas, she should have just killed Barriss. Then there, if she wanted to kill Barriss, she should have just killed Barriss. I don't know. It's just a thought. Maybe as an Inquisitor, you should kill the Jedi you come across. But yeah, that's nothing new either. In every show that has Inquisitors, they happen to come across Jedi constantly and not manage to kill them while surviving themselves. So unless you run into Ahsoka, as an Inquisitor, you do not die from Jedi, but you also don't catch them. It's kind of pathetic. But anyway, this is where it just gets kind of stupid. So Barriss warns that there is no way out of the cave that the Force Sensitive is in. So Lynn will get trapped and not be able to escape, and may need Barriss's help to actually escape and stuff like that. Just kind of warning her in general. Lynn doesn't listen. She goes into this mirror maze essentially of ice. The Force Sensitive child and all of Barriss's helpers and stuff just escape in a ship, presumably to go find Ahsoka. I don't know. Barriss references that she wants them to go to see an old friend, and realistically, I don't know what friends Barriss really has. After she, murdered a bunch of them and then framed one of them for murder and all the other stuff that happened in the Clone Wars. But in any case, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we're not going to see any more of this. Lynn does get trapped. Lynn does get lost, and Barriss tries to help her. Only for Lynn to just straight up stab her through the abdomen. Which doesn't kill Barriss. So add Barriss to the list of people who survive abdominal stabbing in the Star Wars universe. Once again, it's not explicit that she survives. But after being stabbed, she doesn't die. And then she is carried out of this mirror maze by Lynn and is still alive when they leave the cave. Now, we don't see if she actually gets, the medical help she needs, if she gets thrown into a Bacta tank or not, but she is a healer and they are near her home or her tent or whatever it is, so I'd assume she's probably going to be fine. Which, why do they keep stabbing people with lightsabers if they're not going to stay dead? It's I didn't really care too much when it was Sabine. And I like Sabine. I think she's a good character. But, at that point, I was just kind of it keeps happening, but it's not that bad. It's something where, reasonably these characters have people nearby that can save them, and, there's Bacta tanks nearby and stuff like that. It's fair to some extent. But, let's think right now. We've had, We've had the Grand Inquisitor, we've had Reva, we've had Apparently, Lynn survived getting thrown off a cliff. We had this random Jedi getting sliced up in the back. We've had Maul getting cut in half and surviving. Who else? I'm sure the list goes on. It's getting kind of ridiculous at this point how many people get just severely injured by a lightsaber and just walk it off. And I don't know how many more times I can take this before I'm actually going to have had enough, because this one actually annoys me. When Barriss was stabbed, I thought, oh, well, this is just the end of Barriss. They've ended her story here. They've brought her back as an Inquisitor, which is what people wanted. Made her drop being an Inquisitor almost immediately, and then, she just dies. So, that's closing that book. Which, once again, if they had done that, I would be disappointed. Well, at least that's closure. Whereas now I don't know what's happening, and with no guarantee of a season 2, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what I'm looking forward to, or if I'm looking forward to anything. We may never see Barriss again, and I don't know if I'm necessarily alright with that, with how things have been left in Tales of the Empire. So yeah, that is everything. That is all 6 episodes of this show, and I don't know what I was expecting at this point, because it kind of was what I wanted, but at the same time, it really, really just wasn't. So, I suppose in an roundabout conclusion, it has to be said that if you are someone who likes the character of Morgan Elsbeth, whether that be in The Mandalorian or Ahsoka or both, it's worth watching the first 3 episodes of Tales of the Empire. It gives you a little bit more context to who she is as a person, the things she's been through, and why she is the way she is. Beyond that, I don't think I can even begin to recommend this series. If you're a fan of Barriss, like I am, I feel sorry if you watch this. Because as of right now, if you have not seen this, and, you've ignored everything that I've said about these episodes so far, you are living in the best universe. You are living in the best timeline where the fate of Barriss is still up in the air. And we can assume, she probably became an Inquisitor, we should probably run into Ahsoka at some point, and that's how she died, or whatever. Or maybe she was, brought back to the light by Ahsoka, and it all ends happily, and we just, for some reason, don't see her in the rest of the franchise. But, as is, I just fear that this is the last time we're going to see Barriss, and this series has done irreputable damage to what is a cult character within the Star Wars franchise. And I know it's weird to say that she's a cult character, but she's not a fan favourite. A lot of people don't like Barriss. A lot of people would have been happy to see her die in the series, I'm sure. A lot of people would have been happy if she never came back again, was never mentioned. But yeah, they had their chance with Barriss to do the Inquisitor storyline. They should have had it in Rebels. She should have been the Inquisitor that Ahsoka fought in Rebels. And there could have been a little bit of banter. There could have been a little bit of, I can never forgive you, Barriss. Or maybe she finally does. Maybe Ahsoka does forgive Barriss. But, it's like a Maul and Kenobi moment where, Kenobi kind of forgives Maul as Maul dies. I don't know. There's so many opportunities for those characters, that relationship, that friendship that was represented in the Clone Wars, that just isn't going to be represented, I don't think. Because at this point, we already know that after the fall of the Jedi, after Order 66, not only was Barriss perfectly fine, but she became an Inquisitor, left the Inquisition, managed to defeat the person hunting her, managed to save multiple Force-sensitive children that we know of, and then gets stabbed and survives that. She does more than many other Jedi have done, and yet it means nothing. At least to the wider universe. With the Morgan Elsbeth storyline, that at least corresponds to legitimate content that we, have seen. It, fills out the universe a bit more. What does having Barriss in these stories actually do for the universe? She doesn't connect up directly with any stories that matter. She doesn't have anything to do with Kenobi. She doesn't have anything to do with Rebels. She doesn't have anything to do with Ahsoka or The Mandalorian in any way, or just it doesn't have anything to do with any ongoing stories, and I don't get why they would even bother having a character like that. It feels weird, especially when they're aging her up so much. Like, at the end of this, she is actually, like, aged. She looks older than Luminara did. And it just... I don't know what time frame they're working on here, because the Empire wasn't that long. At the absolute oldest, I'm pretty sure Barriss can't be older than 60. And they age her up so drastically. It's odd. I don't know how to feel about any of the Barriss stuff, and it just... As a fan of this character, it really bugs me, the way they've treated her. And, I don't know, it may just be a little bit much on my end. I'll say, I started recording this only about an hour after finishing the series, but I don't know. I wish it was better than it was. And unfortunately, I was partially spoiled to the quality of this prior to watching it. I saw a few video uploads which were basically saying that it was not very good and, lost potential and kind of ruining the character of Barriss. I hadn't watched them, I didn't know the content, but I went into it kind of expecting that this was going to happen, and I'm so very disappointed that it's true. So, realistically, that is everything for Tales of the Empire. I never did a review of Tales of the Jedi, and I may come back to it in the future, and as I said earlier in the video, I may come back to do a bit of The Bad Batch, if not just a retrospective on the entire series, because comparatively, that is an excellent show, and I really enjoyed that, and Tales of the Jedi is also an excellent show, just not one that I care too much about. All I can hope is that this isn't the end of Barriss, because I want to see more of the things I want to see. I want to see her interact with Ahsoka, or interact with Vader in a real way, some way that actually matters, and just... I don't think I'm ever going to see that now, and it really does disappoint me. But with all that being said, this is a very, very long video for a series called Fast Track. I know the irony is not lost on me, but this is also a thoughts video for an entire season of television, even if it is only 6 episodes, and it is about not only one of my favourite franchises, but one of my favourite characters within that franchise. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like it, subscribe if you're new to it, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Otherwise, comment below your thoughts and feelings on the show. I will say, spoilers are allowed, but please just put some sort of spoiler tag at the top of your post, just so people that don't want the spoilers don't accidentally read them. I know I give a spoiler warning at the start of this video, but it's only right that everyone tries to do the same. But yeah, that is going to be it for all my thoughts, all my feelings around Tales of the Empire, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
It's been a long week. I feel like I could use a vacation.